Welcome back to The Whole Person Revolution, a podcast of Comet Magazine. I'm your host, Ann Snyder, and today marks the third episode of a season obsessed with the question, how might we rehumanize the age? Where are the forces of dehumanization most acute, and how could we punch back with a more coordinated strategy that not only insists on the infinite dignity of each person in every domain of life, but nurtures the conditions for that dignity to unfurl in freedom and joy in real time? With me to reflect on these questions today is Aimee Murphy, who founded Rehumanize International, which is a human rights organization dedicated to creating the conditions for just this kind of blossoming. Aimee has just come out with a book called Rehumanize, A Vision to Secure Human Rights for All. And I thought it would be interesting to explore the ways in which a broad, arguably more secular humanism overlaps with and departs from the Christian humanism we at Comment are seeking to thread through all we do. How could we be allies? Should we be? If the fruits of more personalist philosophies look similar, how might we better navigate the animating priors, especially when we disagree? Aimee, thanks for coming on here today to reflect with me on the dehumanizing particulars of our time, but also the vistas for hope. It's an honor to have you on the Whole Person Revolution.
My pleasure, Anne. Thanks for having me.
So, could you give me a snapshot of the story of Rehumanize International?
Honestly, it was just a snowball of events. When I was a teenager, I was a, liberal, queer, atheist, feminist who was also pro-choice. Given the culture I grew up in California, it was a given that if you cared about human rights, you were going to be a feminist, and if you were a feminist, you were going to support the legal right to abortion. But an ex of mine, we got stuck in this really abusive cycle, and he broke up with me after I told him that I didn't want to have sex with him anymore. And then a month later, on Valentine's Day, he raped me. A couple months went by and I hadn't had a period, so I'm panicking. Abortion is the only thing on my mind. I was top of my class. Teachers were saying I was slated to go to an Ivy League school. I figured that having a baby would just upend everything that I had been working toward. When the guy found out through the high school rumor mill that I thought I was pregnant, he came and pulled me out of my drafting class and told me that I needed to get an abortion. And after I asked him why it mattered, he said, well, I just don't want my mom to find out about what happened. And then he said to me, Aimee, I'm thinking that if you don't get an abortion, I might kill you. And in that moment, something just clicked, where I had been, just like casually pro-choice before, even though I had known the scientific fact, the sperm-egg fusion at fertilization creates a new, distinct, and living member of the same parent species. Like, I knew that. I had taken 9th grade bio. I just don't think I had cared until my own life was in danger. Because in that moment, I realized that what he was telling me was, you're an inconvenience to me and you're an inconvenience to my future. Therefore, I'm going to kill you. And I just realized that I couldn't do that to somebody else. I couldn't say that same exact thing to another vulnerable human. And so I felt this radical solidarity with preborn children in that moment who are so vulnerable to this oppression and this violence. And I knew that I couldn't use violence to get what I wanted in life. So I became very radically committed to a philosophy of nonviolence. I didn't have like these big fancy words for it. I was 16 years old. My brain was just like, well, killing humans is bad. Intentionally harming humans is wrong, and I can't be a part of this cycle of violence. I can't pass on violence to somebody else. The cycle stops here. And so I very begrudgingly became pro-life. I did not want to be. I knew that it would really just devastate my social life. And I didn't have the words consistent life ethic or anything like that. That would come later in college, as I learned and researched more. I became so unsettled by this experience that I basically made it my goal to go unsettle everyone else, with the understanding that to be comfortable in a society that has violence just woven into it so deeply, at every level of society, and justified and condoned by our government, to live in a society that is so comfortable with violence, and to be comfortable in that society is to be complicit. Like, that complacency is a sign that we have given up on the dignity of those humans who are victims. So in college, I got involved with more human rights activism. I became the president of the Life Matters Club at Carnegie Mellon. And when I graduated, I was working at the front desk at an urgent care clinic. And I was just like, dang, I can't be done doing this important human rights work just because I graduated from college. So I was in a Facebook group for LGBT pro-lifers, and I, remember typing in like, hey, I want to start something about the consistent life ethic. I don't know if I want it to be a conference or a magazine, but I need to do something. Anyone else interested? And one person responded, Nick Neal. And we got the ball rolling on the first issue of Life Matters Journal that day. And then, in 2017, we changed our name to Rehumanize International because we realized we were so much more than just a publication, that not only were we putting on a conference annually at that point, but we were also doing so much outreach and education in, like schools and, for community organizations and that sort of thing. And we were really invested in getting a grassroots movement, just burning with this passion for human dignity. So it's been an incredible journey, ever since that founding in 2011. And I'm just so grateful that other people have come along to join our team who have been so invested in this central mission of creating a world beyond violence, of creating a world where every human being is respected, valued, and protected from conception to natural death.
It's powerfully stated. Thanks, Aimee. I don't take it lightly that you shared your personal story there. That's a deep thing and probably a little re-traumatizing. So thanks for going there right away, sharing that enunciation moment. Could you talk to me a little bit more about the relationship between violence and the human person and sort of the value of the human person? I'm struck by how when you did make your name change, it sounds like in 2017, not only were you trying to reflect maturing past being just a magazine, but you shifted to language, namely rehumanize, that I would think is a little bit more politically capacious, at least in the American context, versus like being only tagged to say pro-life.
Human beings have just an infinite and untouchable value. As members of a rational species, each and every one of us has what's been termed this selfhood. You have your you-ness, I have my me-ness. When I ask to an audience, do you have anyone that you care about deeply? A loved one that, comes to mind. It could be a best friend, a sibling, a parent, a spouse, or a partner. Then I'll ask one individual, how would you feel if we took away your loved one? They were abducted, you could never see them again, but we replaced them with a similar make and model. So they have the same hair color, same eye color, maybe same height and same tone of voice and same Enneagram or Myers-Briggs personality type. How would you feel about that? And 99 times out of 100, the answer that I'll get is, well, no, I wouldn't be okay with that. And I say, well, why? Why wouldn't you be okay with that? Well, because that wouldn't be them. And that's the core of the answer. Who we are is more than the sum of our traits. It's more than the sum of our height or our hair color, eye color, or weight, or tone of voice, or Myers-Briggs personality type. We have this untouchable aspect of self, a je ne sais quoi, to who we are, that makes it impossible to substitute any one of us out with another. If a human being is killed, someone irreplaceable and unique in all of time and space vanishes. Like, that is the reason why opposition to violence is so foundational in all of ethics and philosophy. It's the moral intuition of that that struck me at age 16, that said, no, like, killing humans is wrong. And it's because we are unique, we are irreplaceable, we are inimitable, we're incommunicable. There's all these like sort of big words to describe what it is about being a human. But usually when I talk to people, out on the road, I'll ask, who deserves human rights? And they'll say, well, humans. No qualifiers there. And I think it is just a moral intuition that we have as human beings, that our fellow human beings are valuable, that, we transfer this value that we have for ourselves to the lives of others too, which is, that's the start of the golden rule right there.
Your use earlier of the phrase radical solidarity, it's so interesting how that was born out of being on the receiving end of a deeply violent threat.
Totally. Yeah.
It's been a very interesting year, I think, in the U.S. context around what is a person, what is a life, whose rights do we value? I'm curious how you rhetorically crisscross between religious and secular worldviews when it comes to standing up for the dignity of persons, including unborn persons. Like, where are the sticking points? Do you find younger people are more amenable and open to your message than, say, those who are boomers or even older Gen Xers?
We really do work a lot in radically different spaces that come at questions of human rights and the right to life from very different perspectives. And it's something that I cherish. So we are, we're a secular organization that works with people from all sorts of different religious backgrounds. I came at the question of, like, how do we want to build this organization and this movement? Really by asking myself, where would I have felt comfortable a 16-year-old queer, liberal, feminist, atheist me. I wanted to build a movement that was radically inclusive, that not only in terms of who we're working alongside for this goal, but also in terms of who we're working for. Like, we want to be a movement of every human standing for every human. And it's like, with that knowledge, I, from the very get-go, wanted to make sure that this would be an organization where people from all sorts of different religious backgrounds would feel welcome, where people, regardless of race or sexual orientation or socioeconomic status or class or any of these factors, would have felt at home. And I think sometimes it is a challenge to translate the conversations between different ideological groups or the different generations, because they're coming from different foundational beliefs or foundational understandings. Being able to sit in that uncomfortable spot of like translating what these people mean when they're talking to each other, when they might have historically been, butting heads with each other, to say like, oh no, like, you're actually talking about very similar ideas or very similar philosophies here. And like, let's pull that out instead of, going in with a hostile or antagonistic sort of perspective. I will say, just from the work, years of outreach, the thing that I've noticed is, most people are coming from a place of good intentions. And that's the thing that I have to tell, all of our new team members is like, never go into a conversation expecting that the other person is a bad person or evil because they might have a wrong opinion.
Right.
Because like try to understand where they're coming from, try to understand their good intentions and work with that. Like, affirm the good, but also challenge where they're lacking. And so, we call this the art of calling in, understanding that, maybe the Donald Trumps and Nancy Pelosi's of the world are high profile enough that they're worthy of calling out. But in general, we exist in community with our peers. Mm-hmm. And, calling people out in that context really just harms relationship. It just tears it apart. But we still need to have these hard conversations. It's not like we can just avoid them, If we actually care about human dignity, we need to be having these conversations. So the art of calling in is, affirming the good and gently challenging them to be better versions of themselves, to be more consistent, to be more authentically committed to human rights, with the understanding that, we want to remain in that community. We want to remain in that relationship, because that's how we change hearts and minds, is through relationship. For my book tour, what I'm hoping to do really is equip grassroots activists with the tools that they'll need to have these conversations in their communities. Because me going out and doing talks might plant a seed, but it's not going to be the long-term relationship developed in community that is going to really, change hearts and minds.
When I first encountered Rehumanize International, I checked out your social media and I was like, okay, so this seems like part messaging organization, part community organizing, part advocacy. You're now publishing a book. I'm curious what you've learned about kind of the promise, but also the limits of messaging, however sophisticated, compelling, shiny. Where do you see it in all the different levers that could be pressed?
I understand why so many people think that social media messaging holds so much promise, because it is able to reach people from all over the world, from all sorts of different backgrounds. The novelty of it, 10, 15, 20 years ago was, certainly something that I was thinking about in starting Rehumanize. And I will say, there have been, good aspects of the social media community that we've been able to build, because the consistent life ethic has historically been so small. Its members have been all over the world, and not necessarily concentrated in one region or even one nation. There is good in the fact that social media has allowed us to connect with each other and build these organizations, build these communities with each other. But from a messaging perspective, the thing that I will always come back to is, whether it's in person or online, ideology is the hardest thing to overcome with any sort of snappy messaging.
Right.
The polarizing political landscape that we're in right now basically means that so many people are more tied to their political ideology than they are to things like their religion or their local community, like the relationships with people in that community. That is such a toxic aspect of our modern human experience, that I'm not sure that messaging alone can overcome. And the only thing that I think can overcome it is persistent relationship with people who are willing to challenge that. One of the more difficult things about cancel culture is, so many people are just like cutting others out of their lives. For some people, for their safety, it's necessary. But I think for a substantial portion of us who might want to end relationships with problematic family members or friends, over whatever political ideology they might have these days, the temptation is really for just to make ourselves comfortable. I think that we have a responsibility. Even though I'm Latina, I have white privilege. So existing in these spaces where I'm calling out my white family members and friends who are saying racist things, I need to be able to be in that uncomfortable space and step in and say, no, that's not okay. You need to find different language that isn't dehumanizing. To step into that uncomfortable space is certainly a challenge socially. I don't discount that, but we need to be willing to exist in these hard spaces. Even when family members get really upset with us and lash out, I think it's better for us to step in and to call them in than for them to be able to continue to say and do dehumanizing things in the public square.
You mentioned what an ideological age we're in. What do you think is sort of in the water that I would actually imagine bring many, many people to Rehumanize International's platform and work with great yearning and a sense of resonance with what you're doing?
There's so many different social forces that are at play right now in our history. I think back to the beginnings of the personalist movement, which was founded out of a desire to push back against the two major dehumanizing forces that they saw in their age, a personless collectivism and a communityless individualism. So the Marxist-Leninist idea of the collective, of the state, at the expense of the dignity of the individual human person, versus the, often American industrialist idea of the individual at the expense of the relationships in the community that we're meant for, that we exist in, just as members of the human species. Those two forces still exist today. I also think that there are more modern dehumanizing factors that exist in our day and age. Things that immediately come to mind are the technocracy, the idea of the technological at the expense of the human person. And there's this other force that I can't quite put my finger on, but perhaps it's a, industrial capitalist expediency. Mm-hmm. I think of things like fast fashion, our overwhelming use of plastic and, tech that's non-recyclable. There's, of course, this rage-powered political polarization. Rage drives clicks. It drives money.
And it sort of awakens people's inherent sort of moral desire to be right. There's a deep moral fiber in us that gets awakened by rage.
Totally. And anger is supposed to tell us when something's been violated. Rage doesn't necessarily drive productive action. I think it often drives destructive action. So I think it's healthy to be angry about the dehumanization that exists in our world today. I think that our, often hysterical, rage-powered news media, it's just driving the destruction of community. It's driving the destruction of relationships. It's honestly driving the destruction of curiosity. And I think the destruction of curiosity and humility is just a really dark place for humanity to go. I think one of the healthiest things that we can do as human beings who are called to live in community and in relationship is to be curious and to have humility towards the others that we exist in community with. And so I definitely think that, the desire to be right at the expense of those relationships is a huge detriment to making any progress towards peace.
You did mention the personalist movement. Has there been a, quote, rehumanization movement that you look to as a guide that feel like they're siblings to what you're trying to do?
Totally. In high school, when I became committed to this philosophy of nonviolence, the first person that I looked to was Gandhi. His commitment to satyagraha, to, this ahimsa in action, was something that really moved me. The things that they were able to accomplish through nonviolent action in India, it baffles me, in the best way. In that same vein, of course, Martin Luther King Jr. I am currently reading a book called No Pity, which is about the disability rights movement. As someone myself who is newly disabled and entering the disability activist community, I have seen the commitment of my fellow disability self-advocates and the work that they have been putting in for decades, just to get basic dignity, to have basic access to things that I think a lot of us who grew up non-disabled take for granted. So I definitely look to self-advocates who are willing to really do the hard work and put themselves in uncomfortable situations and put their lives on the line for the rights of their fellow friends.
Who or what are your enemies? Is it possible, if you're in the rehumanization mission, to have a who as an enemy?
I love this question. This is exactly where my brain sits. There are people who are very difficult for me, whose presence I find challenging. I don't think that we as consistent life ethic advocates should consider other people as our enemies. I think that we can consider ideologies our enemy. Like dehumanizing ideologies are the enemy here. Whether that's an ideology that dehumanizes preborn children, or it's an ideology that dehumanizes, disabled people, or an ideology that dehumanizes Black people. I think we need to view, other humans as, like human siblings, as members of this global community, as, maybe comrades or potential comrades in the work for human rights. I know there's a person that I follow who said, I need to not consider, the people who are having abortions, or the people who have had abortions, or even the abortion clinic workers, or the abortion provider, like the doctors. I need to not consider any of them as my enemy. I need to consider them as future potential friends. Because when that mindset shifts, we stop looking to dehumanize them, to treat them as, this cruel and, like almost Disney villain-like character, and instead treat them with compassion, again, curiosity, humility.
Is there a film that you've come back to repeatedly that you love, that reignites you in this work?
I'm probably going to have to say Princess Mononoke by Hayao Miyazaki. It's just a stunning work. The villain in the movie is someone that I think a lot of us would find compelling. And the hero is someone who some people I think would also like dehumanize. She was raised by wolves. It's an interesting exploration of human dignity, recognizing the negative things that can persist in community. It speaks to like all these like gray areas, like this nuance that has to exist,
Right.
like in these conversations. On a more human rights front, the one that I go back to again and again is Sophie Scholl, The Final Days.
Yes. So you're a Sophie Scholl fan.
Oh yeah, I have a white rose tattoo as well.
That's awesome.
The last word that Sophie is recorded as saying is Freiheit, or freedom. And I recently learned that the word freedom and like Freiheit come from the Indo-European root word, like way back, historical root word Freya, Friya, that means beloved. And, that this word freedom really meant the safety and security and the freedom to seek all the things that we need, like love, shelter, security, food, etc. To have all of those things in the context of community, in the context of these, these kinship relationships that came out of rights of belonging. And so when I examine like the historical meaning of freedom, the thing that I keep coming back to is like our freedom is meant for community. Our freedom is meant for relationship. Our freedom is meant for serving others, like for this belonging. We belong to one another, if you will. Sophie Scholl understood that our freedom is for others.
Yeah. For all of Americans' love of the word, we should probably put a preposition after it. We're not always good at what is freedom for. Mm-hmm. I love that you love Sophie Scholl. That is very cool. So the last question here is, what would you love to see? What does success look like for Rehumanize International in 5 years and in a generation or in 100 years?
So our mission statement is to create a culture of peace and life, and in so doing, to bring an end to all forms of aggressive violence through education, discourse, and action. So 100 years from now, I hope that every human would be protected in the law and respected and valued in the culture and the communities that they live in. That violence and dehumanization would be just, like aberrations in our society and not something that is enshrined in our law, not something that we are comfortable with, something that, all of us would see as just a deplorable crime. I would love to see non-carceral justice systems, really restorative justice systems come to be. I would love to see, anyone who's facing a difficult pregnancy to be treated with compassion and love and be met with resources and community support. I would love to see, no more violent policing, if there's policing at all. I would love and be grateful to see, an end to the death penalty, no more torture, no more dehumanization of disabled people, no coercion to assisted suicide or euthanasia. I would love to see no more embryos stuck in freezers, that every child would be honored and loved and cherished as the unrepeatable human being that they are, that they would be met with family and community care. 5 years from now, the things that I hope for are an end to this dehumanizing, rage-filled polarization. I want to see, just every state, every community to be equipped with the resources to support family life at every stage. For, just the connection to overcome the isolation that often comes with disability, and overcome the isolation that often comes with our hyper individualistic, very success oriented financial culture. In the short run, the things that I'm hoping for are our communities, so cities, neighborhoods, states, to just shift their orientation towards policy as a whole, towards the, upholding the dignity of the human person in all stages and all circumstances, and away from, this preoccupation with money, with economics, with skirting taxes. I think we could end homelessness in 5 years. I think that's something that we could accomplish as a society if we really put our heads down.
And sort of reigniting people's capacity to care. I'll hope they're with you. Thanks, Aimee. I just really appreciate where you've devoted your life. Thanks for this conversation.
Yes, thank you, Anne. It's been a gift.
Thanks for listening to the Whole Person Revolution podcast, which is as much a cultural compass for comment as it is an incarnate witness of the hope we explore in our pages. Like what you heard? Check out this podcast's intellectual seedbed at www.comment.org, where you'll find an artistic rendering of essays that shed light on the very real shadows afflicting the peace of our commons today, but also the many cracks of light. And consider joining us. You can write, you can read, you can host a comment supper in your neighborhood, or you can suggest questions that are pressing upon your desire to be an agent of grace and truth and gentleness and trustworthiness. We want to hear from you, and we need to learn from you. Write to us at comment@cardis.ca and expect a sincere exchange. We're honored to have you within our orbit and to pilgrim together toward wholeness in a world splintering against it. The Whole Person Revolution is hosted by Comment Magazine, produced and with original music by Ali Crummy, audience strategy by Matt Crummy. I'm Ann Snyder, and I'll see you next week.